Thank you, Liz. Good morning and welcome. You just heard from some of our founders and Titans LPs, and Jonathan Rosenberg, for those of you who know him, as always, has the most appropriate way of framing a very complex topic. So thank you, Jonathan. Look, we have a long day, a lot of interesting topics, but I want to start by just saying thank you. It's so great to see all of you in this room. There are relationships here that go back 3 decades. Shakti, at its heart, is community venture capital. Everything we do is through you. You've given us money to invest. You've introduced us to great founders. You've helped those founders scale their companies. And you've been our friend, philosopher, and guide for the last 5 years. So really, we cannot be here without your help. So thank you so much. We have a fantastic community. In this room, we have founders, CEOs, board members of large public companies, obviously startups, people from Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Hollywood. People have come here from Asia Pacific, as far as Australia and India, also from Hawaii, and some people who have just lived 5 minutes away. So all of you are here. There are some people in the room who are grandparents, and there are some people in the room who are still finishing their undergrad in college. So it's a wide diversity. Each of you bring a phenomenal perspective. You're domain experts in your own fields. We look forward to learning from you, and it's going to be a fantastic day. So please don't be shy. Reach out to each other. Reach out to us. We're going to say a lot of things today. Everything we say is a hypothesis. We really are in the venture business, as you know. We are, speaking for myself, often wrong, but never in doubt. So just keep that in mind. If you hear something that you think like, that's crazy, you're probably right. And you can tell me that, so thank you. We're in San Francisco. The sun is shining. The Golden Gate Bridge looks as beautiful as ever. And outside this room, there are thousands of founders who have come from all over the world to start their companies and reimagine our society. Venture capitalists are knocking down their doors, giving them billions of dollars at seemingly crazy valuations. Apartment rentals in San Francisco are at all-time high, again. The average rent for a one-bedroom is $3,400. The average rent across all apartment units is $4,000, higher than Manhattan. And it seems like we're back in the 90s again, right? A lot of people in the room is like, yeah, this seems familiar. Except that now the cars drive themselves, and there are at least almost 10 companies worth over $1 trillion. So we're living in interesting times again. We could have chosen a framing for this meeting as Back to the Future, but we chose the imagination era. And so you might be wondering why we chose that and why now. The credit for that phrase, the imagination era, goes to one of our founders we know well. She coined this phrase at the beginning of this year to describe this coming decade where AI will do all the specialization and humans, we will all left to do imagination, which is a very powerful but a rare skill, and we're all going to have to learn how to do that. I was lucky to see this founder again 2 weeks ago when she was standing in front of thousands of people at an NFL stadium in Los Angeles. And she was describing the new era for her company, which is an AI platform that's reimagining productivity and design. And the stadium was full of people. There were investors from all over the world. There were Wall Street analysts. There were thousands of users of this product. This company now serves over 250 million users a month, is doing more than $4 billion in annualized recurring revenue, has been profitable for 9 years, and is valued over $42 billion. Her company is the #1 undisputed leader in that category. But what struck me about that event 2 weeks ago is that the way she described her company and her product and her vision for the world was exactly the same as she had described it 14 years ago when we first met her right here in San Francisco at Delancey Street Cafe, when she and her co-founder had flown in from Sydney, Australia. And she described her vision for what she wanted the world to be like and how she was going to reimagine design as a use case. When we met her 14 years ago, that room was empty, and almost nobody believed her. But it wasn't the first time that we had a discussion like that with a founder. Just a year later, in 2013, we met with another founder right across the bridge here in Sausalito at a small garage. And that founder had a vision to reimagine commerce and make it circular, and specifically at the luxury end of the e-commerce segment. And her vision was that people who bought luxury items should be able to resell it to somebody else who wanted it, and the person buying it again would know that it was an authentic item, it was real. No one believed her either. A few years later, she took that company public. That company now today is the #1 luxury resale company in the world. A few years after that, we met another founder right here in Mountain View in Silicon Valley, heart of Silicon Valley. And he had a vision to reimagine logistics. And specifically, his idea was that while autonomous transportation would be pervasive, the place where it would find the most appeal and have a really strong business model would be in what he called the middle mile segment of transportation. This is a segment where you can move freight from a central warehouse to a retail outlet. As you can imagine, nobody believed him either. Today, his company is the only company in North America that runs commercially approved and regulatory approved self-driving trucks. No safety driver, actual trucks running around, doing business for companies like Walmart and Pepsi. So what's common across these founders, and many other stories we can tell you, is that these founders on day one, when we met them, were all focusing on a use case that was ubiquitous and frequent, what we call a toothbrush. And they wanted to reimagine that with new technology. None of these companies were AI companies on day one. They're all AI companies today. These founders were able to navigate all the technological innovations that came along on a daily basis and still keep their eyes fixed on their North Star use case, and were able to make their companies into category leaders. What's also true and common is that these founders were not believed. Most people did not believe in their vision, but they kept persisting. Why am I telling you these stories? Well, because obviously we're selfish. We like to talk about our book. Not only did we meet these founders on day one, we were lucky to get to invest in them on day one. And not only did we invest, but we stayed engaged with them, in many cases over a decade. And we kept investing in their success. All of you have invested in their success, and you know these founders. Julie Wainwright at the RealReal, Melanie and Cliff at Canva, and Gautam at Gatik. As we invested in their success and they became successful, they returned the favor. They invested in our success. Many of these founders are now LPs in our funds. They have referred us to other great founders, and we have invested in those founders and in their success. And then they refer us to other founders. That is the Shakti flywheel. Our success depends on our founders' success. We take that very seriously. We're in the customer service business. That flywheel takes a long time to get started. Canva is still private, 14 years after I met Melanie. But once it gets started, it's our moat. It's our strongest defensive moat, because great founders refer us to other great founders. That's how we win deals early. That's how we're able to get in a very competitive space and able to do what we do best, which is invest at inception in founders who are reimagining toothbrushes with new technology, and then just do everything possible to make them successful. So speaking of reimagination, as we all know, the whole world is getting reimagined. And there's a lot going on, and we all listen to the same podcasts and read the same tweets, so I'm not going to bore you with what you already know. But what we thought we would do is give you a sense of our sort of perspective on what's going on. And we'll do that very quickly in the interest of time, but we'll focus on three things. What's going on recently? How do we make sense of all of this innovation on a daily basis, all the disruption? What we think is likely to happen in the coming years, and then what do we do about it? What's the Shakti plan? So the best way to summarize what we think is going on is Sydney, our Gen Z partner. Sydney, where are you? Sydney's right there. So Sydney and I, earlier in this year, we're having a conversation. Sydney's a couple of years out of college. And I said, Sydney, what's going on? And she's like, well, what's going on, Keval, is that about a decade ago, people started getting serious about AI. And Google published this paper called Transformers. Attention is all you need. And then that was kind of out there. But what really happened was about 4 years ago, this thing, ChatGPT, came along. And it made AI accessible to the masses. We all now use it. And then a few years later, coding agents came along and gave AI a business model. Most of the revenue we all hear about today in all these AI companies is really coding agents. And then just recently, DeepSeek and OpenClaw and a lot of these open source technologies came along that made that AI business model more cost effective and allowed startups to do things that were not possible before because the cost of using AI kind of plummeted. So she's like, that's what's happened. A technology that was invented in a lab got sort of mass accessible, business model came along, and then open source made it more cost effective. And as she was describing that, I said, wait a minute, that seems like my first few years out of college. So only 30 years ago. So Sydney and I are living like parallel lives here, Gen Z, Gen X, except the Gen Z version is a lot better, right? Why? Because the Gen X version, the internet, which was pretty amazing, was only in the digital domain, right? It mostly changed online stuff. But AI is both digital and physical, and it's not just on Earth, but it's also in space, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So Sydney's next 20 years are going to be way more amazing than my first 20 years. So you picked the right timing, thanks to your parents. Adam, well done. Adam Landau's here, Sydney's dad. But really, what's going on in the last few years this has happened before, right? We had Netscape that made internet more accessible. Then we had Amazon, which made the internet give a business model, commerce. And then we had Linux and Red Hat, which was the company that made Linux more sort of commercial and accessible, that dropped the price of accessing the internet and starting a business online. Almost identical things are happening right now. So let's look at, so that's how we think, that's what we think about what's happened in the last 4 years. But where do we go from here? What comes next? So let's look at that quickly. And the way we think about framing that is we just go back to fundamentals and say, look, when economies are getting transformed, focus on the factors of production. There are 3 factors, right? Technology, labor, and capital, TLC. So what's happening with each of those things? And we'll just give you a couple of things for each of them. So let's look at technology. And obviously the key technology is AI. So AI has gone from machine learning, Google Translate, to now autonomous agentic AI. People say AI is like electricity. Well, if you think about electricity, the refrigerator is always on. We don't go into the house and turn the refrigerator on. It's always on. Electricity is autonomous, always on. And we'll talk about the cost effectiveness of that in a minute. But essentially, AI has now become ubiquitous and frequent, just like a toothbrush, right? But then this open source thing happened. I think it's something worthwhile double-clicking a little bit, because what this chart shows is in the 90s, anybody remember Sun Microsystems? Right? So all this is a tell on your Gen X. If you raise your hand, you're like me or older. But back in the day, right, when I graduated from computer science grad school, Sun was the de facto computing platform, right? You couldn't do anything without a Sun server, Solaris Unix. My first company, when we started HX in the mid-90s, we had to rent a caged Exodus data center, buy a bunch of Sun servers, put an Oracle database on top of it. We raised $22 million. 21 of that went to Sun, Oracle, and Exodus. Literally, right? You had to build your entire computing stack with millions of dollars. And then what happened? Then Linux came along. Linux came along, and all of a sudden, the cloud computing era started. Because you could just put Linux on a PC, a server blade, for like $1,000 and rent a cloud and launch your website without a whole lot of capital. And Sun's market cap, which was over $100 billion at one point, vanished in the subsequent years. It eventually got acquired by Oracle. So this was a moment in time where if you had asked any of us back in the 90s, what do you think is the future of Sun Microsystems? Every one of us, I would have said, it's going to be the biggest company on planet Earth. Most of you in Gen Z don't even know what Sun is. It's not that, Sydney. It was a computer. So Linux is a big thing. Well, OpenClaw and DeepSeek are also a big thing. And if the past is the prologue, the next few years might have a very different outcome than what we're assuming right now. The last thing about AI, So again, this ubiquity and frequency aspect of AI. Like if AI is truly going to be like electricity, it has to be affordable, right? Technically, it's there today, right? Agentic AI is autonomous. But is it affordable? If we really leave AI on all the time, how much is it going to cost us? So we did like a back of the envelope analysis. And when we went into it, our assumption was it's going to be another decade or so before AI becomes affordable for all of us, agentic AI. Well, it turns out, because the cost of tokens have fallen precipitously, token costs today are like 600 times lower than they were 3 years ago. And by the way, a lot of that is because of open source, right? You look at some of these open source models, just like 2 days ago, DeepSeek's latest model is 100 the cost of the latest OpenAI model. So as cost of tokens have gone down, ubiquitous, always-on AI is kind of approaching the cost of electricity. This $165 is the average household price of electricity per month in the US today. And autonomous AI is approaching that. By the way, the reason why chat AI, which is the prompted AI that we've all been using so far, is cheaper is because most of the cost in AI models is in the input token, not in the output token, right? And chat has basically the same number of input tokens and output tokens, but agentic AI has a lot many more input tokens, so it's more expensive. Okay, let's talk about space. And why is space important? By the way, what's happened with space is that, 40 years ago was about putting a man on the moon because of national security and geopolitical goal, and we did that. And then we sent out interstellar probes, and now we're, for the first time, entering what we call S-commerce, or this commercialization of space, which is really the time when entrepreneurs and VCs have a role to play, because until then, it's really about large CapEx and big budgets, which mostly governments and large companies can afford. So something interesting is about to happen in space. And again, this has happened before. The Amazon IPO, which happened in 1997, if you look at the business model of the internet, very different pre-Amazon IPO and after that. Before the Amazon IPO, there were 3 e-commerce companies that had gone public. After the Amazon IPO, 300 companies went public. So it was a 100 times explosion in innovation, venture capital, and exits. Well, we think the same is likely to happen as SpaceX goes public in the next couple of months, right? And why is that? Because the cost of launching something in space has, again, plummeted by 100x. We have Chiran here, who's Chiran's raised his hand. Chiran's here from India. He was a scientist at the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO. And he's building a company that's, I'll let him tell you in a minute. But that's an example of an entrepreneur that's starting a company that's going to benefit directly from the SpaceX IPO, because the cost of lowering things has gone down. And as we know, with Moore's law, when costs go down, a lot of innovation and venture capital follows. So 2 interesting moments and 2 interesting catalysts: open source in AI and the SpaceX IPO for S-commerce. Let's look at labor. So that was technology. Let's look at labor quickly. And there's a lot of stuff going on in labor. People think there's a white-collar recession. Blue-collar jobs are fine. Software engineering, if you have a kid, we have a 16-year-old at home right now. 2 years ago, he told me he hates coding. He's not going to do STEM. It broke my heart. I was like, you're going to be unemployed and homeless. You're going to fade right into San Francisco. And 2 years later, I think he's a genius, because his mom, who's a liberal arts major, is smarter than me. She's like, look, he's on the right path, because maybe AI is going to do all the coding. So what's happening with software engineering? Well, maybe it's a mixed picture, right? Because yes, entry-level disruption. Marco is here. Where's Marco Brocker? Marco is going to Cal right now. By the way, Cal, soccer team captain, mechanical engineering, graduating right now. Amazing kid. And Marco and his friends I think some of them are still looking for jobs coming out of a great institution with engineering backgrounds. Why is that? Because there is definitely disruption at the entry level. But the overall picture, let me go back. The overall picture for software engineering jobs is actually pretty good. If you look at the next decade, there are a lot of forecasts that say jobs are going to go up in that field. Why is that? Well, because of this. So yes, it is true that AI is doing a lot of the coding. And so if you think about companies, mostly Silicon Valley tech companies that are the producers of AI, yes, they're becoming more efficient because AI is doing all the coding. But the companies outside of Silicon Valley that are using AI, they're actually deploying AI in their non-technical businesses, if you're making a ball bearing, or if you're making paint, or if you're an agricultural company, if you're Walmart, you are using AI to become more productive. And so those people are hiring more engineers than ever before, right? So the net employment in engineering jobs is actually likely to go up. And the kids get it. The kids are really smart. Kids are always smarter than us. This is what this chart shows is the enrollment at the University of California campuses. There are, what, 9, Marco, 13 campuses, 9 to 13, something like that, dozen campuses, lots of campuses, public university, largest public system in the world. The blue line is the computer science enrollment. It kind of went up for a while and then slowed going down. But this sort of orange dark line that's going vertical, those are majors in AI and data science. So yes, the kids are not taking computer science as much, but look what they're doing. They know where the jobs of the future are. They're going where the puck is going. Really, really smart kids. Gen Z is going to be totally fine. So that was labor. Let's look at capital. So this is like my favorite chart because that's what I do as a VC now, sadly. I think about money. And this chart, 3 charts, but this captures the last 40 years of venture capital. And this data comes from Professor Jay Ritter at the University of Florida. It's in the public domain. You can look it up. And what this says is we have, over the last 40 years, done something crazy, insane, not in a good way. We meaning VCs. We have backed way more, so we're backing 20 times more startups per year. The number of startups, venture-backed startups, has gone up by 20 times. Chart number 1. The number of IPOs, the bottom of the funnel, so that's the top of the funnel. The bottom of the funnel has basically remained the same. There are roughly 50 IPOs per year, up and down, right? Companies are staying longer private. Companies are staying longer private by almost 2x. It used to be that companies would go public 4 to 6 years after inception. Now it's 8 to 10 years. And they have bigger revenues. But if you look at the number of companies that are profitable when they go out at IPO, it's plummeted from 80% to 20%. So this is really insanity. We're putting more money into the private market. Companies have more time to go build a durable business. And they're coming out with a shittier product, sorry. How is that possible? Well, we made it happen, but it's not going to last. So our view is that ultimately, in the venture capital industry, you can scale capital by moving the line between private and public markets, but you cannot scale the number of companies. There are only so many great companies. And why is that? Because ultimately customers, whether you're a consumer or an enterprise, you don't want to buy the same product or service from 10 people. You want to buy it from at most 2 or 3. So the bottom of the funnel is going to be constrained. All right. In the interest of time, I'll move quickly here. Sorry, Liz. The question that comes up is, OK, that's all great. That's what's likely to happen. Future is uncertain. But where are we in this cycle? We are about to have 3 IPOs over $1 trillion, right? SpaceX, OpenAI, Anthropic. So isn't it all done? Like, why don't we just go home? What this slide shows is there are 8 billion people on the planet, right? The gray dot, each dot is 3 million people, roughly. The green is the population that's using AI on a regular basis. So clearly, there's a lot more of this bucket to fill. We're just in the early innings, guys. OK, so if we're in the early innings, stick with me for a little bit. $1 trillion, we throw this number around a lot now. It's like, billion used to be a thing, now trillion's a thing. And we have a lot of companies with $1 trillion in valuation. But could we imagine a company with $1 trillion in revenue? Think about it for a minute. Because if we didn't imagine this, why would we be in the venture capital business, right? So we think there is a potential to find a company, maybe not just one, but many that would have $1 trillion in revenue. The basic math would be you to find 2 billion people that spend $500 a year. Is that possible? Sounds crazy. Is it possible? Turns out today, people are paying $500 a year for electricity. That's the average yearly annual bill across the world, not just across the world. And there are 7 billion people who are doing that. So could we imagine a company getting 1/3 of that? We can. That's why we're in the venture capital business. We sell hopium, and this is our hopium. OK, so we talked about the factors of production. We talked about the fact that we're in the early innings of this humongous revolution that lies ahead. We talked about the fact that the two key ingredients for explosion in entrepreneurship and venture capital have arrived, which is open source and a business model for this new technology. Just like it happened for the internet, it's going to happen for AI. So early innings, the inflection points have arrived. The next 20 years are going to be amazing for Sydney and for all of us. But the number of IPOs, the number of great category-leading companies is still going to be small. So if you believe all of that, if you take it all together, then I think the only logical conclusion is if you're deploying your capital, you would put it into a fund that's investing at inception stage, it's early, has a small curated portfolio, concentrated bets, and is focused on the two biggest markets that are going to be meaningful, AI and space tech. Lucky for you, that's what we do. That's the product we're selling. You bought the product. Hopefully, you'll keep buying it. But in all earnestness, thank you for your support. We couldn't be here without you. You guys have given us so much inspiration, so much material support, and just the enthusiasm that we feel in this room and every year from you is really inspirational to us. So thank you. Now you're wondering, that's all great, but what have you done with my money so far? So for that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz.